Oh, you have photo, right? Yeah.
As you all know, I spent the last 6.5 years working with hundreds of entrepreneurs in the Midwest and the South, and I was staggered by the economic realities that much of the country is facing. And I wrote this book. How many of you all have already read my book? Yeah, so most all of you. So if you read the book, what the book was trying to answer for me was, why did I have such a sense of dread and foreboding when it came to the future of the United States of America? Like imagine being the celebrated social entrepreneur who's helped create thousands of jobs around the country, and you have this sense of foreboding, and then people bring you and say, "How did you do it? Like, well, how are things so positive?" And I'm like, "Things are not positive at all." But then my economic incentives were actually against my saying things are not positive at all, because I had to sell the fact that my organization was doing this incredible work. So the book was me trying to make sense of my own instinctive certainty that this country was heading in the wrong direction. And what I did was I just followed the data. I actually did not know what the data would say, but the data painted a much darker, bleaker picture than even I'd imagined. So raise your hand again if you read my book. Do you remember when you were reading my book thinking, like, no way that's true? Did that happen to you like a few times? You were like, oh man, like that, like that. I had that same feeling writing it. I was like, 40% of American kids born to a single parent. No way that's true. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh man, it's like, from 3 different sources, including the CDC. Like there was source after source, data point after data point, where you had this very clear narrative of a country in increasing distress. And I have learned so much throughout this last 2 years or so. Have I ever been running for president for 2 years? Hang on, let me do the math on that.
Math.
Yeah, let's call it like a year and a half or so. I have learned so much in the last year and a half, and unfortunately my sense that this country does not understand what's happening to it is even higher now than it was when I started. In large part because when I go around the country and I talk about the facts that I found in my book, no one ever disputes my facts. No one ever investigates. No one ever cares. Like the level of actual conversation going on is so superficial, it is staggering. And so, like, that is one of the reasons I'm so sure that this campaign needs to keep on rising and rising throughout this year and into next year. And we have a chance to make history in part because our institutions now are so weak, are so in need. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so you had a sense that America was going to be trending upwards, and then at some point that started to head the other direction. And now that I've been in the guts of our political system and our media conglomerates over the last year and a half, we can win this whole thing.
Yes.
We can.
Yes.
Yeah. Because, and I can go through, I probably shouldn't say this since we're recording, but like there are some folks that are right now let's just say that the front runners of today will not be the front runners of tomorrow. I have a lot of certainty around that too. So one thing I will just draw a parallel around is that this time in the last cycle, who was the leading Republican candidate? Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush was going to be our next president. Donald Trump, when he announced, it was seen as a bit of a joke. When he came down that escalator, I think he got 1 or 2% that first set of polls. And Jeb Bush raised $100 million in super PAC money, and clearly Jeb was going to be the nominee. And let's just say there's some parallels and what happened last time. And so the lessons I took from my 6.5 years running Venture for America and then writing the book and then this last year and a half running for president is this certainty that this country needs our message. And it's certainly from this community, it needs the message that it's not immigrants that are causing economic dislocations and problems. It is technology, it's an evolving economy that's pushing more and more Americans to the sidelines. And for someone, it was Bonnie who said that you wouldn't want your kids to do this.
Not in my wildest dreams.
Even if they had the wires.
But we'll support you.
Oh, thank you. Well, one of the things I say is that I actually think running for president is easier than running for local office. I have a ton of admiration for the people who run for local office. I actually see running for president as considerably easier. because you can occasionally put on civilian clothes and walk around.
So Richard taking notes.
Yeah. But also running for national office, you have a much bigger network of people you can draw on. And so that's something that I actually take a lot of joy in. Where I met so many people in our community from around the country. Minneapolis, we had this incredible event. We're heading to Seattle later this week. But I met so many people in our community. It's made me very proud and invigorated. And my message is going to be very distinct from every other candidate in the field. So some of you made mention of the September debates. So I'm going to walk through what the path looks like for the campaign over the next number of months. Then I'd love to take questions. So you can see the mainstream media is now waking up, and the debates are going to be this massive springboard. So I looked at the ratings of the debates in 2015. Between 11 million and 24 million Americans watched the Republican versions of the debates. Now, we all remember the CNN town hall we were very excited about. About 500,000 Americans watch. So the debates are going to be 22 to 48 times the level of exposure. And the vast majority of Democrats, vast majority of Americans have no idea who's running for president in 2020. They're paying zero attention. If they know anything, they heard something that Joe Biden's running, and they like Joe Biden, and so that's where they are. So between 11 million and 24 million Americans are going to tune in on June 26th. And they're going to see me. They're going to see this.
No, this one.
This. They're going to see that.
Yeah.
So I'm probably not going to have the scarf because that would be odd.
Yeah.
It's too hot. I'm not going to have the cap because it would seem a little impolite. But they're going to see me. And I have to say, when I started this campaign, this was one of my thresholds for success. Because imagine millions of Americans turning on their TV and seeing an Asian American face on that stage running for president. I mean, that itself is to me, I said if that is what we achieve, how much would that be worth in terms of media impressions? There's so many Asian American arts and cultural organizations and entertainment. It's imagine having a real presidential candidate on the stage. I mean, that's not even, it's not art, it's reality. And so I'm going to be that on that stage June 26th and June 27th and on July 25th in Detroit, because I've qualified not just in June, but also in July. And then what Jake and others were referring to about the September debate, the thresholds are twofold. One, 130,000 individual donors. As we're all here together right now, we're at 113. Do you think we can get 17,000 more individuals?
Easy.
So easy, right?
Yes.
So
this room have got it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So we're going to get that. Let's make it happen as fast as possible, just because if we get above that threshold immediately, what the media is going to start doing is the media is already going to start trying to figure out who's qualifying for the September debates. And they're going to say who's over the 130,000 threshold. And if we get me over that threshold, I think there are right now about 6 other candidates who are above that threshold. So we get me over that threshold, then I'm top 7.
Yes.
So let's make that happen as fast as possible. The second thing is something we have only some influence over, but not total control. The second criteria is that I have to be polling at 2% in 4 polls, but the polls do not count until June 28th. So in other words, they're looking at polls between June 28 and September 1, and I need to be at 2% in 4 polls. And those 4 polls can be either national or in the early states. Now, right now, I'm polling at between 1 and 3%, depending upon the poll and the state. So the odds of my polling at 2% in 4 or more polls over that 2-month period, very high, even if we don't grow between now and then. So if I knock it out of the park at the debate on June 26th, then we can expect a bump. And then all this press, Colbert, Bill Maher, Daily Show, Pod Save America, Rubin Report, all this stuff cumulatively. So it's very, very achievable for us to get to 2% in those polls. If we execute even competently between now and then, we'll be at 2%. If anything, that should be our baseline. We should be shooting for 4, 5, 6%. But then this phase, our community, is not just on the debate stage in June and July, also September and October. And instead of 20 candidates, it's 10 or 11 or 12. So think about that threshold. It's so fun. It's almost like this process has been tailor-made for this campaign to succeed. No, seriously, it's really quite remarkable if you think about it. Because we're going to have the grassroots support, we're going to have the donation thresholds. All we have to do is just keep growing in our polling support. But the best way that we can influence collectively my polling support, how many of you actually received a phone call from a pollster? Probably none of you. You have? Oh, that's
Of course,
incredible.
all the time.
Really? I have not.
Yes.
Wow, what did you do, Don?
I just hung up. Most time I have. It's because I
Yes. So there are a couple peculiarities. How many of you all have landlines? Landlines. Pollsters call landlines.
Oh, okay.
You have that.
That's why they don't call me anymore.
I call
Right.
my cell phone.
So think about who that screens out
Oh.
among the people they're reaching. They don't reach anyone in this room. So you have to, one, have a landline, and two, be willing to pick up your landline and talk to a pollster. So who's that going to eliminate? It's going to eliminate a lot of young people. It's going to eliminate a lot of tech-savvy people.
Intellectuals.
Smart people.
It's going to eliminate,
Business people.
well, it's going to eliminate it's going to eliminate a lot of more technology literate people,
Right,
shall we say.
right.
So the polls, in some ways, are not our best friends because it's a very poor mechanism to measure support. There was one poll that just polled, well, it polled a group of people in Illinois. I was at 10% among 20-something-year-olds.
Oh.
Young people really like me, but young people are not getting polled. That's just a poll study. So the ways that we can influence my getting to 2, 3, 4, 5%, the main thing is I just have to perform, truly. I mean, I just have to show up and knock it out of the park at the big stage. But the things that we all can do collectively, we have to raise enough money so that at the end of the second quarter and the third quarter and on, that the campaign shows financial growth and the press goes, oh my gosh, that niche internet candidate who raised 1.7 million in the first quarter, he doubled in the second quarter. And in the third quarter, he doubled again. Like, that's actually going to fuel the press, which is going to fuel polling. And then the second thing we can do is try and drive more people to the campaign, more small donors, and then get above that 130,000 threshold as fast as possible. And that also is going to drive media. It's going to drive polling. So that's how we get on the debate stage September and October. And the incredible thing is we don't even know what the next level of the debate cutoff is. It might just stop there. It might be that I'm in the top 10 and the top 10 debate for quite some time. So you're looking at September, October. The first votes begin in February in Iowa. And that is going to be where the rubber hits the road. To give you some insight into our operations, the place where I think I'm going to crush beyond all expectations is New Hampshire. And I can go through some of the thinking with you on this. A lot of it is that I've been there. I went to high school there. And we got a guy named Steve Marchand on the campaign who literally, if you were to pick anyone in the state of New Hampshire to endorse me, it would have been Steve Marchand. He ran for governor as a Democrat in 2018 and was wildly successful and then fell just short. Now, people regard him, he was the youngest mayor ever of a city called Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And if you were to pick one person who'd get behind me, it would have been Steve. Steve's he's like the former wonder kid mayor sort, who's now like a 40-something-year-old, but he's still like super energetic. He runs marathons. He's like this type. And all the grassroots people in New Hampshire know and like him. And so when he decided to get behind my campaign, it was like a holy cow moment in the state of New Hampshire, where people were like, Steve Marchand got behind Andrew Yang. Like, that's actually, to them, I have to pay attention to this guy. It was such big news that even the Boston Globe published it and put me on their top contender list in New Hampshire, because they said if Steve Marchand gets behind this guy, then everyone's going to give him a longer look. And so what's happened is I've gone to events in New Hampshire, and Steve has introduced me, and then I've spoken, and then they go to Steve afterwards and say, okay, now I get it. So what Steve has done is Steve has opened up their minds to our message in the campaign, and then when they spend time with me, they realize what's happening. They realize that I am the future of the party, I'm the future of the country, and I'm looking out for them. But so that's one reason why we're going to outperform New Hampshire. The other big reason is just the makeup and composition of New Hampshire. It's an open primary. So that means that Republicans and the third party of New Hampshire, Libertarians, can vote in the Democratic primary. All they have to do is show up. Now, if you look at the way it's going to play out in New Hampshire, the Republican primary is going to essentially not exist. It's just Donald Trump running the table. So if you're a Republican, what are you going to do that day?
Vote for Andrew Yang.
You're going to vote for Andrew Yang. And you all know that I show up on Fox, I show up with Ben Shapiro, I show up on these bipartisan, and so a lot of the Republicans, and again, the third party in New Hampshire is Libertarians. And so the Libertarians love the freedom dividend. It's named after them. So none of this is going to show up in the polling, because when they poll folks in New Hampshire, they're going to poll Democrats with landlines. So whatever the polling number says is happening in New Hampshire, we're going to crush it. That is our big opportunity to shock the world. Now we're going to compete in Iowa, I'm going to try and contend in Iowa, but the real surprise the world state is going to be New Hampshire. So I'm heading to New Hampshire for the 14th time next week. It's actually a pretty pleasant trip as they go. I don't even drive myself anymore. Now I just sit there and write messages and something like that. Someone just drives me up. So this is a bit of the landscape of the campaign. These are some of the mechanics. But we can contend for this whole thing, because I've now met most of my opponents. I have a sense as to what their strengths and weaknesses are. And we have a more genuine vision for the country. We have a clearer message that's much more bipartisan. We're already peeling off thousands of Trump supporters, independents, conservatives, libertarians, as well as Democrats and progressives. We can build a much broader coalition. And the number one criteria Democrats have for their nominee this time is what? Beating Donald Trump. That's right. So there's a lot of circular reasoning going on right now. Why is Joe Biden the most popular? Because he can beat Donald Trump. Why is he going to beat Donald Trump? Because he's the most popular. It's that's the circular reasoning. So when people realize that, wait a minute, the person that's already drawing thousands of Trump supporters across the aisle, that has thousands of Republicans literally changing registration so they can support him in the race, that guy is actually a better bet to beat Donald Trump. And when people wake up to that reality, this campaign is going to grow and grow and grow. So thank you all for being at the ground floor of this growth. I can't tell you how grateful I am. Let's make history together in 2020. So I would love to take questions since I'd love to take advantage of this environment.
Who would you like to have lunch with 3 person or dinner?
So because I'm a very efficient person, they would all be alive, and they would all help the campaign in various ways. So the question is, who are the 3 people I could meet with that would be the biggest needle movers of the campaign the fastest? And so I'd like to take suggestions, but the 3 that pop into my mind are Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, love him or hate him, and either Oprah Winfrey or Ellen DeGeneres. It's going to be tough to win them over, but I would love to give that a crack. I'm actually, when I'm in Los Angeles for Bill Maher this week, I'm also meeting with one of the big celebrity agencies, the William Morris Endeavor Agency, and they're inviting a bunch of their celebrity clients. So I'm going to be meeting with the Hollywood stars and see how many of them I can win over. So that's my list of 3.
How do you feel about many people running in Democratic primary this time? It's unusual.
Oh, the Democratic primary?
Yes,
That's
more than
big a
25,
field.
I think.
Yeah. If you are a Democratic politician, you probably realize that this is going to be your best opportunity to run for president maybe in your entire career. And that if you don't take this opportunity, then you may never have it again. Because that's just the way politics works. So they're making a calculation. They're saying my upside here is that maybe that my campaign catches fire, maybe I elevate my national profile, maybe I wind up in the cabinet of a Democratic administration, and then my downside is very, very limited. Ordinarily, in a campaign like this, there's actually a bigger downside, because last time, for example, the Hillary Clinton campaign let people know that if you run for president, we're going to get you back. This time, no one's doing that. This time, the Biden campaign is not saying, if you run for president, we get you back. It's a free-for-all. So because of that, the political incentives for many, many politicians are actually to run versus not run, and so you have a very crowded field. Now the crowded field has been quite good for me. It's been quite positive because I have a niche appeal that's independent of other candidates, and the fact that I've already outperformed a bunch of sitting senators and governors is like a very positive aspect of the campaign. So it's actually been a win for me.
Mr. Sun?
Yeah. What's your view about the current U.S.-China trade war, number one? Number two, related is that my concern that the negative picture about China will have a negative impact on your campaign. If that happens, how can we avoid that?
Oh, wow. It's a very, very important, deep question, you. So the U.S.-China trade war is, to me, somewhere between counterproductive and disastrous. And when I was in Iowa, there was a farmer who said to me that he'd been working on a trade relationship for 6 years that fell through because of the tariffs. And he said, I have no idea if I'm ever going to be able to revive that. That's 6 years of work down the drain. And he was spitting mad. And so if you see that as the experience on the US side, you know that's happening on both sides. You know it's happening to workers. And this particular farmer had to fire people. He'd been investing in preparation for this relationship that now has disappeared. And so the trade war is bad for both sides. And I agree with you that it's fueling negative perceptions in the US of China, which has been going on for quite some time. It's one of the reasons why my campaign could be very positive, because one, it distinguishes between Chinese and Chinese Americans, and like Asians and Asian Americans, so that's good. Remind people. You know, my Chinese is quite poor. Most of you probably realize that.
We test you on that.
Oh no, you just take my word for it, Bonnie. But when Americans hear me speak, I remind them of the kids that their kids go to school with. You know what I mean? Like I just seem like the Asian kid in their neighborhood. And so I like remind them, it's like, hey, Asians and Asian Americans different. Will the sort of the cloud over U.S.-China relationships hurt my campaign?
Right.
It's possible. I will say that the level of racism I've encountered at the early states has been very, very low. And so then if I show up, they're like, oh, interesting. And then it's like, hear me out, and like everything. So the racism is very, very low in the early voting states. So that's Iowa, New Hampshire. Number 3 is Nevada. Nevada is a diverse state. It's 12% Asian. So if we get to Nevada, that actually becomes very interesting. And then South Carolina, about 60% of the Democratic electorate is black. And here's one thing I want you all to know. This is another secret. Black voters, and I don't know if Paperboy the Prince wants to speak to this, but there's this mistaken impression that black voters are just going to go straight to black candidates, and it's just not true. Right now, Joe Biden is the most popular with African Americans in South Carolina. And so we have a chance to compete for the black vote. I spoke to a group of black voters not that long ago, and this woman said something to me that went very, very far. She said, black people can smell bullshit a mile away, and you don't smell. It's very, very positive.
Amen.
And a black mayor came to me and said, you can say things that we cannot say. Where I'm trying to give everyone $1,000 a month, and then when I say to black voters, studies have shown that the median African American net worth will be 0 in 2053 because of automation and the fact that we're going to get rid of all these jobs that are filled more often by people of color. And so $1,000 a month is going to go much further to help black people manage this transition, because this is an economic natural disaster, and who gets hit first in a natural disaster? Poor people and people of color. And so black people hear this message, they're like, oh my gosh, that guy's right. And then they see in me also that like I'm like this messenger. I'm like a much better messenger. I'm going to tell a joke that some of you might have heard. How many of you heard my conversation with Preet Bharara last week? I was on his podcast. He's a very famous anyway. So he asked me, is America ready for an Asian president? And I ordinarily answer that question being like, oh, of course America's ready for an Asian president. My race is not relevant. Like, people just care about my vision for the country. But I said, I said something different to Preet. I quoted a friend of mine, and I said, America's ready for an Asian president because it will irritate everybody. But then everyone will actually be okay with it. It's like Like we're like this strange neutral party that you can insert, and then people see us. Another friend of mine, Dave Min, who ran. How many of you know Dave Min, who ran for Congress out west?
Yeah.
So Dave said something to me really funny. He said, "Everyone just assumes we're moderate." Like everyone assumes that whatever you say, it's actually very, very middle of the road. And so that's sort of the place that we can occupy in American politics. It's very, very interesting. The immigration situation in the U.S. is very out of date. It needs an upgrade. Haipei was asking me about this as well. And so there are some obvious fixes. And to me, the fact that you recruit some of the best and brightest from around the world to study at your universities, and then a lot of them want to stay here and live here and start business here and create a life for themselves here, and then we essentially make it super hard for them to stay here, makes zero sense. And Mitt Romney said in 2012, sending them home to compete against us makes no sense. So giving them a green card would make a lot of sense. So that's one component of it, but there are other components too. Immigration is going to be one of the hot button issues. I think I can make progress because I'm the son of immigrants and people will sense that I'm pro-immigrant, but there are moves we have to make that will just help rationalize and modernize our system. And other countries have already taken those steps. Like the U.S. needs to, in my mind, make some difficult choices and follow suit. But certainly, like graduate students, having them try and stay here, I think, is a no-brainer for most people on both sides of the aisle. I have many friends who've been on both ends of the H-1B visa situation, for example. And there's also like the weird lottery that's attached to it. Like there's so many parts of our system that make no sense. And so I would dramatically expand the H-1B visa system. To me, the notion that if you bring in a skilled worker that you're somehow crowding out an American worker from that job, I just don't think it's true. Like I've been parts of these companies that are just trying to employ people. If they didn't have the H-1B visa, they would just go to that other person's country and employ them there. Like they wouldn't necessarily hire an American for that job. That's not really the way these companies operate. So the big challenge right now in this country is this movement towards zero-sum thinking. And the zero-sum thinking goes to Hugh's question too. It's like the American lens towards China's rise is going to be that China's rise is somehow bad for the US because it's zero-sum. It's like someone else rising, we're falling. Or it's like if I hire this H-1B visa, then I didn't hire an American. That's actually the greatest challenge in America right now, is trying to get us away from the zero-sum thinking. It's a challenge between abundance mindset and scarcity is winning in this country 60-40 very easily. And we're going to have this massive challenge in the years to come because we're an aging country, and demographically conservatism and threat resistance actually rises with age. So we have this massive demographic challenge that's actually going to make us more conservative and probably more xenophobic and hostile towards modernization and change over the next 10 to 20 years. This is going to be a very, very rocky period. And I'm hoping that my campaign can shine a light through it, and I can help bring us into the 21st century in a way that will increase people's comfort level. It's going to be a great challenge, but I will say, like, I've never felt more strongly than that this country needs a different form of leadership. Because the people that are right now going to be running are just going to be having totally different conversations while ignoring like the conversations that need to happen. In all seriousness, Donald Trump, a number of months ago, said he cannot wait to run against everyone in the Democratic field. And his great concern was the only thing, he's like, you can look this up. He said, the only thing I worry about is if some new person comes out of nowhere, no one's ever heard of. That's the only thing I worry about. And then dozens of people emailed me and said, he's talking about you. So the fact is, what's Donald Trump's greatest appeal? That he's a non-politician and like an entrepreneur. I'm like his mirror image foil. Like, it really is like the opposite of Donald Trump is the Asian man who likes math. But the Democrats and progressives, as soon as I become the Democratic nominee, then every Democrat and progressive is going to look up and say, wait a minute, it's Donald Trump or Andrew Yang? I had some misgivings about Andrew Yang, but I'm totally on board with Andrew Yang. And then I'm going to get a clean 20-25% of Trump voters, and there's going to be nowhere for him to go. Like the way he'd attack me, like none of his attacks would work on me the same way they do on other politicians. Like the joke that we say is like, what's his nickname for me going to be? Comrade Yang?
Math,
Yeah. It's going to be tricky because like the folks that are on the right, they're looking at me and being like, well, like he's talking about the problem. Like Donald Trump got so much credit just for talking about the problems last time. And so Donald Trump's move was say, hey, you're having problems, you're losing your jobs. I'm going to bring the jobs back and make America great again. The Democratic response was, America's already great. And then that did not work so well. Now, no one thinks I'm saying that. I'm like, yeah, those problems are real. And instead of turning the clock backwards, we have to turn the clock forward.
He mentioned a lot of problems, right? So
Yeah.
he's attacking immigrants. So
I mean, he's got, right now, I think his approval rating is 43 or 44%. But I have thousands, really, I've had hundreds, thousands of conversations with people where they've said, I voted for Donald Trump last time, I'm going to vote for you this time. Some of you have friends who resemble that in the Asian community, because the Asian community is kind of split 50-50. There are a lot of people who supported Donald Trump who are like, I'm going to get behind Andrew Yang this time. You should let them know there are a lot of white Trump voters who are saying the same thing to me. And the white Trump voters, one of the things I sense about them is that they were just pissed off that no one seemed to be listening to them, and Trump seemed to be listening to them. One of the reasons why they like me is it seems like I'm listening to them. And this is one of the things the Democrats are just missing. Democrats still don't seem like they're listening to them. It's really odd. And I've now gotten deep enough into the process to know that that stuff is real. Like there's like a very real set of blinders that the Democratic politicians and the left-leaning media have towards a huge segment of the population. And one of the things that's irked the hell out of me is like I talk about problems that truck drivers have or white people have, and then like the liberal media is like why do these white people like you so much? And then, and then it's like, well, maybe because I'm talking about them, like hang out with them, like on their problems. Like so, if I become the nominee, I'm going to have a much harder time becoming the nominee than beating Donald Trump. If I become the nominee, I will clean Donald Trump's clock. The problem is getting me past the nomination process.
We're going to line up here for photos, and then we'll make sure that everyone, because I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to take a photo. And